Let's see what we got here. All right, there you are. Pull back a little bit. There we go. Cue our little friend. All right.
If you caught it earlier in the week, I did a video talking about the new map, the Jahai Bluffs, which is truly fantastic, leagues ahead of the domain of corner that we had with the previous episode, and there's a hell of a lot of different things hidden within it to talk about. So I summed up some of my initial impressions and showed you some of the coolest things, like the existence of the Shatterer 2.0, the death branded version, what the devs were doing with the anomalies. I've also done a video where I talk in pretty good detail about the overall story and what's happened here, but I did also promise we'd return to talk a little bit more about the Jahai Bluffs because there's just so much going on, and indeed in the comments I prompted you guys to let me know if we'd missed out on anything. Well, today that's what I want to touch on because there are a lot of really interesting things, starting off of course with what we see in the title there, the Commandos. Now, unfortunately, I haven't had too much time to play the map this week and still haven't seen them. I will be desperately scrubbing through trying to find them in the footage for you guys here. But basically, the devs did something really crazy with the time-space distortions involving bringing back some old creatures that I'm not even really sure what the canonicity of them was before this point. So let's rewind the clock to just on the cusp of Guild Wars 2 coming out. The devs used to do profession-specific highlights and announcements in the roll-up to the launch of the actual MMO. So they did a week where they looked at the Elementalist, and then later, suddenly we were talking about the Warrior, and then later we were talking about the Necromancer. You never knew which class was coming up next. It just so happened then that in either 2011 or 2012, when we were anticipating the next profession reveal, the devs threw up for April Fools a profession called the Commando. And it was this ridiculous thing, you guys can see the footage in the background, where they really went the whole way with it, made special art, a proper release page, little trailers and clips showing off their various skills, where these weird commando creatures basically represented modern day Earth specialist soldiers that would call in helicopters to do their bidding, would snipe people, and it was just in general a very farcical, funny idea. Hilariously, very shortly later, they did announce for real the Engineer, and people whinged that the aesthetic of the Engineer mines and whatnot was too close to the Commandos, which was clearly ridiculous for this franchise, but the joke itself was very well received. One of the other jokes they did, of course, was the Mesmer reveal, where they initially announced it to be the Minstrel, but that turned out to be an illusion, and the Mesmer was what it truly was. Anyway, so this was a fun old thing that people looking at Guild Wars 2's release got to enjoy, but even Guild Wars 1 players of the time got to dip their toes in this, because at that moment, the devs revealed for April Fools a new quest chain that was based loosely on the plot of the Terminator movies, in which you go back in time to the point of the Guild Wars in Ascalon, and you actually work alongside these commandos with their helicopters in Guild Wars 1 to kind of save the day. So what do we have? Well, some press material that wasn't necessarily in game, probably can be viewed as not canon. We also had, though, in-game an April Fool's quest chain where we really got to interact with a helicopter and these commando guys. The helicopter as well, if I remember correctly, was the highest level thing that had ever been introduced in Guild Wars 1. It was level like 40 something, I think. So, yeah, it was all a big joke. Nobody really worried. Subsequent April Fools after the sequel released came and went. There wasn't anything too interesting about it until this release, where the devs have announced time-space distortions are a thing, and they have decided that for one of the large events that procs around the Jahai Bluffs, where suddenly it will start snowing or trees will warp into reality, I believe one near the Jahai Fortress does spawn commandos. real Commandos. Now, again, because I've not got to see them at the time of recording this, I don't know what skills they use. Do they have guns? I'm not entirely sure, but apparently the way they look is very much like those old Commandos. What does this mean for the lore realistically? I don't know. The devs are obviously being a bit cavalier about this. Do we actually speculate now that at some point in Terrier's future, humans are destined to become this technologically advanced? Or once upon a time in the past, was it like this? Hey, who knows? I find myself once again thinking along many of the same lines fractals once upon prompted me to. Also, in that you could use these rifts to demonstrate anything. And people have pointed out the benefits this could have for the mastery system and other aspects of lore. What's fascinating about this, though, is while fractals were confirmed and tethered to only be the past, and at that we seem to have only seen Tyrion's past as well, this, showing the Commandos, is kind of like the future too. Or do we suggest that this is just some crazy bonkers stuff and the Commandos never really existed, they were just manifested by the mists and the warps themselves? I don't know, but it's basically just a fun, cool little Easter egg that a lot of you guys pointed out and I think is awesome about the new map. Maybe you can give me your take in the comments. Moving on, there are a ton of other little things. They might feel a bit weird because we can't get huge discussions out of them, but I do think it's worth sharing nonetheless. In the last Jahai Bluffs episode, I did ponder, what if you only own the Jahai Bluffs but not the Domain of Corner? What happens at the portal? Well, here's what happens. The portal animation simply doesn't render. It doesn't animate in any way, which you guys might remember or have noticed actually happens for the Sun's Refuge too. When you first visit the Jahai Bluffs on your account, all the entrances to the Sun's Refuge just look like collapsed mine shafts and stuff, but once you've unlocked it, full-on portals appear. The devs are using that same back-end idea for the entrance into the Domain of Corner 2. Obviously, that's not relevant for the northern entrance because that's core Path of Fire stuff, which everyone would have had anyway. But yeah, it goes a little bit deeper than that as well, in that you'll notice they don't actually put a waypoint or NPCs or, you know, heart vendors or scouts near that map transition either. And it's suddenly very obvious to me as to why they did that, because they want it to look as nondescript as possible for a player who doesn't have all the content available. And I think that now that they've figured out what they want to do for that kind of thing, we might see it happen a lot more in the future. I'd love them to go back and do a pass on some of the old maps like Bloodstone Fen, South Sun Cove. I'd still love a proper connection as is hinted at on world map art. But hey, even if they don't, at least looking forward, we've got that to be excited about. Or at least I'm excited about it. But that might be because I'm a bit too much of a nerd with this game. Another cool new addition as well, I think it's new for this season, is the existence of branded Centaurs. So a lot of people have mistakenly seen this patch as the introduction of Branded Awakened, but if you've been watching my channel throughout the whole release, you'll know this already. Branded Awakened did appear right at the start of the season in a single story instance. It's just now we've got a lot of them here in the Jahai Bluffs. Well, there is a totally new variety of Branded that's been released, and that's Branded Centaurs. As far as I know, they actually only exist at the Shatterer event, where they are kind of taking the role of big, non-CCable, non-removable charging things on the field that do big CC and damage you basically got to avoid. We see that kind of mechanic a lot in raids. But yeah, you can see them there. I don't think there are any individual ones you can fight. It's nice to see Centaurs too, because Guild Wars 2 players might not have any appreciation for this, but there was so much Centaur activity here in the original game, especially these areas of the Jahai Bluffs. In fact, there are some hints to the Venta Cemetery on this map. The Venta Cemetery is a Centaur graveyard. There were that many of them around, many of them forced into slave labor by the humans back then. But, you know, we've had those hints at Path of Fire's release, at the Bone Palace that it was kind of built out of Centaur bones. But we've not seen any of them moving around. Well, here, Kraukatorix claimed some of them, and it's nice to get that in there. It's also just awesome for me to see and appreciate that each episode of Living Worlds, they are finding the time to create entirely new varieties of enemies and build on that asset pool. And that's kind of the big thing right now. If ArenaNet wants to convince us that Living World is as good as expansions, as many of their interviews around the 6th anniversary were talking about, if they want to convince us of that, they need to be able to do stuff like this, add entirely new creatures and branded Centaurs. Yeah, pretty nice to see. A little thing as well, and I mean a really little thing you guys pointed out, we were talking about the monument to the defeat of Palawa Joko in my previous video, and how I was kind of happy to see it was still there because it's an awesome landmark, but at the same time, I appreciate it was a bit weird for it still to be there. Joko would have probably destroyed this monument. Joko probably would have wiped it away and never had any evidence that he'd ever fallen or been punished or imprisoned, right? You guys did point out very sneaky what the devs did here is it's not called the monument to the defeat of Palawa Joko anymore. It's the monument to the return of Palawa Joko. And so I love this even more now because what they've done is they've showed how there are multiple ways to propagandize and twist and corrupt history to your own agenda. Here we see Joko is happy to leave this monument existing, but it completely lies about its purpose and what it represents, and you get enough people believing that it's about his return, then that's all that matters in the contemporary world, right? So yeah, that was actually really nice to see. Gets you thinking. Next, another fascinating thing about the Jahai Bluffs that I kind of could talk to you guys about in the story recap we did, or I could talk about it here. But when you get to a certain point in the story, one of our allies, Blish, starts following you around. And this is not a spoiler, you don't have to know why he is or whatever. But what's really fascinating that the devs do here is a special new thing with phasing. This happens in the domain of Vabi as well, for what it's worth. Essentially, during this part of the story, Blish will be with you in the Jahai Bluffs as a separate character, legitimately walking around with you as a separate NPC that you can click and target, and he won't participate in combat, but he will actually wander around the map with you. And this is such a cool thing. It's the next level of increasing what they can do with phasing and how to tell story in the open world. You know, it's such a long saga and story with ArenaNet, how they went from 2012, where they could basically phase nothing and basically had no tech to deliver real story in the open world, so everything was funneled away into these tiny little instances. To slowly through Living World Season 1, they start learning how to phase NPC written dialogue, and then NPC voice dialogue, and have voice dialogue only play for one person and not others. Then it slowly continued to increase throughout Heart of Thorns, Path of Fire Season 3. Here at Season 4, we have like the ultimate thing, a full-on ally of ours that wanders around with us. But what if another player looks at Blish? Wouldn't that be kind of weird if they're not at that point in the story? Wouldn't it be weird to see hundreds of Blishes wandering around in the Jahai Bluffs? Well, yeah, it would. So how do they solve that problem? They were very clever about it. There was even a dev post on Reddit to do with this, where essentially other players can see Blish, but instead of Blish, they actually just see a random desert critter, I think a prairie dog, wandering around following the players. So from other people's perspectives, it's never spoiled, and it would make sense that there could be loads of prairie dogs around corner, where it wouldn't make sense that there's hundreds of Blishes. So really just intelligent, nice little thing to see the devs doing there, and we get to enjoy the fruits of that now in the story as it goes forward. Less and less the devs feel they need to instance things, but when they do instance them, it's because they've got really big dramatic stuff they want to do, such as the chase sequence at the end, or the fleeing sequence at the end of this patch and whatnot. So, yeah, another thing that this makes me think of as well, and I don't want to get some big Guild Wars 3 hype train started here, but it's interesting for me to see as a studio all the tech and backend and things they've learnt, such that if they ever were looking for a clean slate and a new product, they can apply these lessons immediately to it, and the 2012 equivalent version of their next MMO or product starts with all of these lessons baked in. It's kind of fascinating to think of, right? Another small thing, bouncing back to one, we were talking about Masteries and how many of the Masteries from Heart of Thorns are relevant in this map. I still haven't seen any of the Season 3 ones, and you guys haven't confirmed to me any of them are here either, so that's a bit of a shame. But I did want to point out a New Hawk Wallow I found between the two videos, where you can go to one of the disturbances. There's a wallow that appears. If you try to use it, though, it just teleports you miles into the sky instead of a real exit. And that's a fun example of a cool, flavorful way the devs can have those old Masteries still impact my experience as a player and have fun as a player, even if it doesn't lead to anything tangible. So that was great. And another thing to do with the disturbances, which I had missed and you guys really wanted to make very clear, you can see Kralkatorrik by looking within the rifts and seeing his big ugly mug staring out at you from the other side. It's cool to see how the devs can actually layer those textures in there. So next time you are at a disturbance, guys, you may want to actually just take the time to A, look at the things you're fighting. It could be Commandos. B, look for Kraukatorix staring in at you, and then maybe whatever Masteries might have appeared. It's awesome the way that they can have an entire wallow pour in and out like that, you know, just as they do with the trees, fully cohesive materials and elements that just pour in and out is kind of awesome. So yeah, there you go. That's my recap on a lot of the things with the Jahai Bluffs. Now, by no means have I given you everything here, and there's kind of a whole other layer to the map involving the Sun's Refuge, where you can do lots of mini achievements involving speaking to various NPCs and recruit them to your cause. It's kind of fascinating the way the devs have done that and added so much more re-exploration and story and collection stuff to this just because they have the Sun's Refuge now. But I want to talk in more detail about that on a dedicated Sun's Refuge production, so keep your eye out for that. I haven't had much time to play the game yet this week, so I have barely even began it, which I'm also kind of okay with because, I mean, apparently there's a lot of dialogue that's easy to miss. So we will go on that adventure soon. If it's really exciting and interesting, I'll be happy to do another recap for you all. Until then, though, I'm looking back to getting into more raid story and even guides on the various encounters and whatnot there. So keep your eye out, guys. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. If you're still keen on a lot more content from me, please remember there is a daily video series going up on my second channel right now to do with PvP. So if you're remotely curious, I'll leave a link for you down in the comments. Cheers, everybody. See you soon.
You swim like a quagga.
You want to race and find out? See ya.
Worst date ever.
Oh, heck, that don't look right. Let me fix this here. Here they come. Confirm we have your target.